Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I am your host, Khalid. But today is the 3rd of March 2023. It's the end of the week, last day of the week, but we've got lots to discuss with you. So without further ado, this will be the highlight of today's show. We'll be discussing war hysteria that has been highlighted by India, not since now, since quite some time. And in a veiled criticism of our neighbor, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs has said that the generous supply of conventional and non-conventional weapons to India was severely straining South Asia's strategic stability and threatening our national security. On the one hand, India is trying its level best to destabilize Pakistan directly and indirectly. On the other hand, there is a deliberate attempt to destabilize the country as far as the weaponry and the supply of weaponry is concerned, also through the buying of conventional and non-conventional weaponry by India. This is going to be our first segment. This imbalance as far as the strategic relationship between these two neighbors are concerned, and how India's deliberate attempt to create an imbalance in the region is not going to work in the long term because of Pakistan's highlighting the situation nationally, regionally and internationally. Our next segment concerns Ishaq Dar Saab's press conference today that was held. He talked about the economic situation of Pakistan. He talked about the past, what happened with the previous government and what they inherited when this current coalition government came, and what steps are being taken by this coalition government, despite of the fact that they have put aside politics for the benefit of the state. This he also added that the country is not going to a default or a default-like situation. This was stated by him more than once. This and more will be discussed, that on the economic front of Pakistan, what has happened in the last few months and what should we expect now in the coming weeks. Then we'll be talking about a 2-day global conference to save the world's oceans that is underway in Panama as we speak. Business, political leaders, environmental activists and academics are discussing ways to address a multitude of threats that, of course, the world's oceans are facing. And finally, we'll be talking about American magazine Time that has issued a list of Women of the Year, in which Pakistan's climate defender Aisha Siddiqa's name has also been included. She is a young Pakistani activist who's been working tirelessly to highlight the issues concerning climate change and, of course, pollution. This is going to be our last story. Let's begin with our first, and that concerns the strategic imbalance that India is trying to create as far as the supply and purchase of weaponry is concerned. That and more as far as the relationship between India and Pakistan is concerned in this whole region, and how there's a deliberate attempt by India again to not have a balance between the different important countries in the region, namely Pakistan and India. More in the following report.
The regional pariah, India has a history of unwarranted and provocative acts to divert public attention from domestic challenges. Besides its unilateral hybrid warfare against Pakistan, the belligerent Indian regime is persistently engaged in military buildup and defense pacts. Relations between the two neighboring countries have remained at a standstill for the last many years, but the real dip came in August 2019 when New Delhi unilaterally revoked the special status of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan has not only downgraded diplomatic ties but suspended bilateral trade with India in reaction to New Delhi's unilateral measures in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Hina Rabbani Kar has stated that there has been no back-channel diplomacy going on between Pakistan and India. Hina Rabbani Kar further elaborated that Pakistan has always taken initiatives to promote peace. However, the cross-border hostility from India is of a unique type. Foreign Office spokesperson Mumtaz Zahra Baloch reiterated Kar's statement and asserted that there is no back-channel diplomacy between India and Pakistan. Pakistan has the largest interest in unleashing the potential of this region, but the BBC documentary on Modi has shown the world why Pakistan has stood on this position.
Lieutenant General Raza Mohammad Khan Sahab, Defence Analyst, joins us online. Sir, thank you very much to have joined us. Sir, this strategic imbalance that is present and that is being highlighted time and again by India in its favour, is it going to help this region? Is it going to help regional politics in any way whatsoever? Why is there a deliberate attempt by India? What are the ultimate goals?
Okay, Bismillah Rahman Rahim. I think when we are talking of disarmament, then there are few aspects which are part of that. And the first part that is the nuclear weapons, which there is clear non-proliferation. And India is member, not a signatory of that, but it is getting most of the benefits from almost all the Western countries, led by the United States because of the US-India nuclear deal. Secondly, there is the fissile material cut-off treaty or the FMCT. Again, on this issue, I think there is support to India so that it can target Pakistan, and therefore Pakistan has a very principled stand on that. But I think India is trying to get advantage of that. In addition to that, India is responsible for an arms race, not only in the subcontinent, but also in Asia. And on insistence of the United States, the nuclear supplier groups of 48 countries uh, whose uh, whose purpose is to prevent proliferation by controlling the export of material, equipment, and technology that can be used to build nuclear weapons. But unfortunately, India, although it is not a signatory to NPT, but it is being provided on exceptional basis all kind of support from the energy countries, so much so that the United States has even supported India becoming a member of the NSG. But obviously, other countries like China and a few others, they have raised objection to that, and India has been denied mercifully that status. You're also aware, that India has started a race in space, which is against, the principles of all principles of disarmament. It is also violative, of the MTCR, which is the Missile Technology Control Regime. And you saw, that the Indian missile was launched inside Pakistan, and that was actually some kind of a modified Russian missile, and the whole world saw that. So I think India is responsible for creating both conventional as well as strategic instability in this entire region, and it is endangering everyone. And I think the earlier the United States or the members of the UN Security Council understands that, the better it would be. And therefore, I think uh, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs was very right in warning the world that I think there are principally four countries which is led by the United States, and they are France, Israel, the United States, and its allies, and also Russia, which all of whom are actually arming India to the teeth. So this is a matter of great concerns, I think, for
There are
Pakistan.
so many matters of great concern, Raza Mohammad Khan Sahab, whether it be India part of the Asia Pacific strategy of the US, whether it be the civilian nuclear deal between the US and India, whether it be other priorities that India has as far as the sale of conventional and non-conventional weaponry is concerned. This whole attempt to strain the security environment of the region, and specifically when we look at the defense budget of India for the upcoming year, is that of 5.94 trillion rupees, that is 72.6 billion US dollars, which is 13% up from the previous year. What kind of strategies does India has up its sleeve as far as its defense is concerned in the upcoming year, and B, what is it so afraid of in order to enhance its defense budget by 13%?
Okay, so this is the declared defense budget, and according to my information, it is actually close to $80 billion. There is a non-declared portion of this also, which I think is in the range of another $10 billion. So that makes when you look at the Indian imports for defense-related weapons, I would not call it defense. I would call it aggression-related weapons. Then it is the biggest importer in the world now of foreign weapons inside India. And obviously, history tells us that most of the weapon systems of India they are deployed against Pakistan. When we are talking of tanks, all of them, almost 100% are deployed against Pakistan. And similarly, guns and missiles, and it has been reported, by very neutral observers. It is telling the world that it has got a threat from China, but that is not true. If you look at the actual deployment of its weapon systems, so obviously, Pakistan is very concerned about that, and I think we need to highlight this issue at every forum. And let me also add to this is that when we are talking of the $80 billion, then I would say at least half of it is being spent by India needlessly in Kashmir to try and hold it by force, but it is not able to do that. And look at the Human Development Index of India, where I think more than 50% of its people are living below the poverty line. But I think there is nobody to question them on why they are spending so much on defense when they have zero threat from Pakistan. And similarly, there are some border issues with China, but it is because of the Indian stance that those issues occurred. So they're squarely responsible, and the more weapons they get, I think they will keep destabilizing the region.
On the one hand, Raza Saab, there's this destabilization of the region. On the other hand, there's also an irresponsible attitude when it comes to acquiring any kind of weaponry concern. I would like to take you to uranium. I'd like you to take you to nuclear material and how India has been acting extremely irresponsibly in the last few years. There is a certain nuclear exceptionalism that we feel that India is enjoying. If you look at the previous months, February 2022, 8 people, including 2 Indian nationals, were apprehended in Nepal, and they had material that was nuclear in nature. 4th of July 21, 6.4 kilograms of uranium in Jharkhand. 7th of May 21, 7 kilograms of uranium in Maharashtra was confiscated by the Indian authorities. How is all of this happening, and why is the IAEA not taking the necessary stringent measures against India? And on the other hand, I also like to point out that it is the same India that points fingers at Pakistan as far as being an irresponsible nuclear state is concerned.
I think the nuclear weapons safety and security, Pakistan is known the world over. And I think other than India, probably nobody is raising a finger of them against it. And the IAE representatives were here, I think, last month, and they saw the world-class facilities uh, for the protection of our nuclear weapon system and the responsible manner in which they are retained and maintained. But you're right, when it comes to India, then I think they are aware, the whole world is aware. But they look the other way because India has the support of the West because of the obvious reasons that they want to support India.
Raza
To
Saab, when you talk of support of the West, there are reports from the same Western region that talk about India possessing unsafeguarding fissile material that is sufficient to build 2,680 nuclear weapons. At the same time, we have countries in the West that are making and signing civil nuclear deals with India. Why this strange, hypocritical, duplicitous attitude in your point of view?
Well, I think it is very clear that they want to use India as a bulwark against China. India is part of the Quad group, which comprises India, Japan, the United States, and Australia. And India is now literally, a non-NATO uh, ally of the United States. And I think 2 years back, the United States signs sale of weapons worth more than $3 to $4 billion with India, and that is the main reason. And the United States and the NSG members, as I mentioned earlier, are themselves violating the nuclear non-proliferation treaty by keeping quiet on what is happening in India and by continuing to supply fissile material and technology to India just because India has signed a deal with the United States. So all these violations are occurring, and I think all countries of the world who are interested in peace and in the total elimination of nuclear weapons from the world. And Pakistan is actually supportive of that. That is Pakistan's state policy there. Nuclear weapons should be finished from the entire world. Uh, so I think those countries must prevail. Their voices must be heard. And unless such sanity prevails, India will continue to do what right now, which is not good for neither India nor anyone else.
Raza Saab, since the 1970s, since in fact its first nuclear test in 1974, India has been receiving generous supplies of advanced conventional and non-conventional weapons, technologies and platforms. I mean, there is no stoppage anywhere when we are in 2023. Shouldn't there be some kind of a control mechanism in order to ascertain as to where and how India is using this conventional and non-conventional weaponry and platforms?
Okay, let me tell you, I think a very interesting fact that the nuclear suppliers group, which is now comprises 48 countries, actually came into being after the Indian nuclear explosion in 1974. And because it had been getting technology as well as fissile materials from a number of countries, and it was decided that this must be controlled. But ironically, now the same NSG has been convinced, or the US continues to convince that group now to support India in provisions of all kinds of technology and fissile material, which you rightly said, is now in totally unsafe hands and in control of now the RSS extremists and fundamentalists, which by itself, is a great worry. Pakistan, China, and all peace-loving countries of not only Asia but the entire world. Of course, obviously, this is the hypocrisy, uh, and fortunately, I think it goes on for reasons known to them and all of us.
All right, Raza Saab, last question to you. I'm talking about all of this imbalance in the wake of what Hina Rabbani Khar Sahiba said at the Geneva-based conference on disarmament. What she said, and I'd like to repeat that at the end, she said that favors being done to India was straining the security environment and heightening the risks to peace and stability in the region. What options, in your point of view, does Pakistan have to ensure its security under the current circumstances?
I think, first of all, uh, Pakistan has to look at its own capability. And, we have our own plans to have our minimum deterrence capability, both in the conventional field as well as in the nuclear field, as well as, in the delivery of the non-conventional or the nuclear weapon systems. Uh, we have a very clear edge on India as far as the quality of our defensive equipment is concerned, and the whole world knows about it. India also knows about it, and we also have a very clear edge, in the training and motivation of our all our defensive weapons. So I think we should not get into an arms race with India. That is not our policy. But we need to continue to maintain that minimum deterrence level and also to keep our training and motivation levels as high as possible.
All right, Raza Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. That was Lieutenant General Raza Muhammad Khan Saab joining us and talking to us about this strategic imbalance that is present in the region, specifically because of the generous supply of conventional and non-conventional arms and weaponry to India. And this was something that was highlighted by Hina Rabbani Khar Sahiba at a recent conference in Geneva. Let's come to our second segment that concerns Pakistan's economic situation and, of course, all the different rumors that are circulating across the country as far as Pakistan going into default. These have been negated again by Ishaq Dar, our Minister for Finance, while he was addressing a press conference today. He also talked about Pakistan's economic situation and, of course, why and how Pakistan has come to this point. More in the following report. We've been joined by Amir Durrani. He's a leading economist who joins us online. Amir, thank you very much to have joined us. Amir, two things first. Firstly, let's talk about Pakistan and all the rumors that are circulating of Pakistan going into default. Those have been negated in the news conference that Ishaq Dar Saab had today, in which he addressed the media and talked about these rumors and also why Pakistan is present at the current state of affairs as far as its economy is concerned. What do you make of Ishaq Dar Saab's press conference, A? And how important is it for Pakistan to realize that it is not going to go into a default-like situation?
Thank you very much, Khalid. I think this is a very tight question, and I'll keep my answers short. So the first thing is, what do I think of the finance minister's speech? After a very long time, I was expecting some future to be actually talked about, but the speech was obviously at the demand of the journalist community, pretty much dealing with what has passed, with the exception, which is your point number B, that in essence, his great deal of clarification was provided on the fact that Pakistan is not going into default. Now, the way Ishaq Dar basically stressed that, if you remember the conference, is by giving numbers about how they've been able to make payments. But when a finance minister comes on stage and says, we are paying something back, I will not even refer to the payments he was talking about, just to get them back, rolled over with a new tranche, that means you're picking up loan after loan after loan to repay loans. So that is the first point that struck me from that entire conversation. But I think the good part of the conversation was that I think there is pretty much an understanding that without the measures that they are doing, they will not be able to go forward. There was less blaming of the fund, which is, I think, very positive, because at the end of the day, what we think of the IMF and what they do is something aside. And I've been watching a lot of the news channels talk about this. Everyone is now saying, Pakistan did bad, but IMF did worse. So let's not talk about the fund first. Let's talk about what Pakistan has been doing. So I think that Pakistan's posturing that they don't need the fund or they will be able to manage the fund in a way which they have never been able to, and no country has been able to, because the fund is a political creature as much as it is an economic and financial creature. And we know that from day one. And I think that today, I think the most positive thing I found was a less posturing. And basically, I mean, even if you call it resignation, but I think the news to the fund, because they do watch the media very closely, and amazingly have better penetration into Pakistani media and intelligentsia than most of us do. So I think that was the best part of that conference for me.
All right, now Ishaq Dar Saab also reassures that the ICBC is going to roll over $1.3 billion in the next few days, and he talked about how a certain amount of 1,319 billion was added to circular debt during the previous tenure due to mismanagement, and there has been a 79% increase in foreign debt also witnessed during the previous political tenure. Do you feel that any government which it comes, whether it is this government or previous or the future government, needs to be extremely careful when it comes in as far as handling finances and the government's economic situation is concerned? and look forward and look beyond political point scoring and look at what the state is all about and what are the necessities that our state needs instead of what their political gains need.
Well, is that not the point, the very point that the finance minister stressed in the conference today? I mean, I think 30% of his speech was that we care about Pakistan, not about our own political uh, revival or survival. I mean, if that, we can put it that way. And he basically says that this is being done for Pakistan. But I think that one of the things which is very important to understand here. There is a part of that when you talk about should we stop posturing. Political posturing is something in South Asian politics, in African politics, in Latin American politics, which is much higher in terms of percentage of what a politician talks about how they did finance when they were there and how they will handle it when they come back again. And I think that aside, I think really one of the things which everybody, and I must stress, especially PTI, should walk, literally tread very carefully, because let's assume that this government changes in November or whenever the elections happen, and let's assume for a second that they don't win the elections. Whoever comes next is going to be burdened and saddled with a stagflation, a depressing, let me call it this way. It's not an economic term, but I call it a mental stagnation of the economy. So mental stagnation of the economy means that you have stopped so many wheels and cogs from spinning, be it industry, be it total production of agriculture, be it how you reacted to the floods, that to get this machinery cogs back in space, to get that V12 engine firing instead of what we are running or seem to be running on is a three-cylinder, two-stroke motorcycle engine. So essentially, to do that, I think they have to come up with a plan. And currently, I think the biggest problem in the political discourse is the absence of this plan. And I think that people of Pakistan, of which I think 70, 80 million are actually young people, I think they are not going to take this anymore. I'll give you one example. Look at the news conference and how the journalists sitting out there were retorting. And look at who asked these questions. 70% of those questions came from non-mainstream media. So at least that's how I mean, it was GNN or whatever. I mean, I don't even know those channels exist. But nevertheless, I mean, what that means and the fact that they were asking literally for their rights to ask anything of the government and nothing to be kept. I think that's point number one. But I think before I stop, if you allow me, one quick point
All right.
is that to say that in an interview or in a press conference like that they know that dollars are moving physically, because obviously there's no banking system, across the border into Afghanistan. They know that the Peshawar market and the Kabul market, where the rupee, as you know, is called the Kaldar. So the Kaldar rates are essentially the real exchange rates of Pakistan. And the fact that this physical smuggling is happening, and there was a bit of a despondency shown and a lack of, or should we say, inability to control physical movement of goods, either dollars or be they gold bars, across a border that we know very well. I think that is kind of hitting yourself in the foot vis-a-vis your writ of the state is concerned. So that's another very striking thing I found.
All right. Amir, I'd like to understand another point that R Raza made. He said the global inflationary pressure was a major reason for rising inflation in the country. What other factors have added to this rise in inflation in the country, in your point of view?
Well, I mean, if you subtract energy and food and you take it on one, keep it on one side, which is, and I think Adil Mansoor in Business Recorder wrote a very good piece on this. Maybe he sent it to me, or maybe it was published today. I'm a bit confused, but basically, very nicely said that that's the core inflation, right? So if you take out the basket with the food prices, and you take out the energy prices because they are volatile depending on the commodity markets, that whether it be oil, whether it be, like say wheat, sugar, whatever. So if you take that out, I think the core inflationary pressure means that there is an inflationary trend going around, which is having a full impact on the Pakistan economy. And two or three things that one can talk about here. The first thing is that in Pakistan's economy, a rising interest rate only impacts those who are in the financial system. And there are two parts to this financial system. One is the financial system of actually having a bank account and then using or actually borrowing from the bank account. Do we get that, right? Number one. Number two part is the stock market. Now, the stock market is a very small sliver, no matter how we call it, trillions or billions of rupees. It's a very small sliver with 34 families and about 300 some companies controlling this whole thing. So, Pakistan, for example, has more than 3 million small and medium enterprises, and so you can imagine that there is a disconnect there. So let's then start with that. This to say that the interest rates have to be kept at a certain point, just because the formula as it goes is to say that you always have to make sure that you have a positive in borrowing, right? Positive borrowing means you subtract here what is the inflation, and then your interest rate, which is your lending rate, you minus subtract that from that inflation. So if it's 20 and your interest rate is 22, then you are 2% positive, right? But if the inflation is 20 and you're at 18, then you're essentially the cost of borrowing is negative. So that's basically what the people are told, and that's what the government does. But really, what is dragging and causing this inflation? I think the inflation that we are basically understanding and seeing today in Pakistan is driven more so by an uncontrolled structure of the economy, which basically means that nothing really. For example, if I lower the gas prices, so the cost of transport services should go down. Give me one time that the cost of transport services has ever reacted other than up. Right? So there are lots of times we put the cost of, so those services keep increasing.
So what you're trying to also say is that certain sectors take undue advantage, and that is what also causes this inflation.
Yeah, I mean, that is roughly, and I think I've had an argument about this with a lot of people, but essentially that is the point. And secondly, I think the whole idea being that if you produce less and if your entire load, in other words, you are always, so basically, mostly the private sector is in debt, but in our case, the government is in debt. Where is the largest debt? The largest debt is being done by so provinces owe the government, 60 provinces plus certain enterprises, which are all Pakistani, and I think we talked about this last time I was on your show, that 60 some percent, almost 70% of what we say is our debt, is driven by our borrowing inside, right? And then the federal government is owed all this money, and only 30% of that debt is what we owe the rest of the world, right? So essentially, the fault herein lies with the provinces. Their fault lies in essentially, as you said, that the way the economy is structured, not only are markets not working, which means that, for example, you put wheat support prices, you put sugar support prices, you decide every price, including mandi price, which essentially says you are intervening in markets. And number two, because this is being done, the retailer and the service provider in the private sector essentially doesn't play by normal economic rules.
I'd also like to understand, Amir, this, rupee versus dollar rate that goes up, goes down, goes up, and a lot of people say in the press it's because of uncertainty of Pakistan's deal with the IMF, and when there is some positivity that comes out, as we've seen recently, the rupee suddenly gains ground against the dollar. Why is all of this, change in the parity, rupee versus dollar, dependent on Pakistan's deal with the IMF?
You have me stumped there, and a lot of us are stumped by this question. I think even the finance minister had no clear answer on this particular point. I am actually just amazed that day before yesterday, the interbank closes at 259, 260. Yesterday by noon, it's gone up to 281, 285, and today I wake up again, it's at 269 or 260, whatever, right? Now, what is going on? So for first and foremost, the interbank rate is essentially, and this is something a fact, and I'm just going to, and I'm going to forward this to you after the show, but it's really the average of bids and offers that all these commercial banks that we know, they quote for a flash market sentiment, right? So basically, who's manipulating the market? Technically, according to the interbank, the banks. Now, the banks have been playing their own funny role in this entire money trade, the forex trade, which, as you know, because they are the ones who have to open the LCs, they are the ones who have to provide, the exporters and the importers with required letters of credit. So, I mean, there are hypotheses on this. So I think that it's basically a flash market sentiment, but the banks should not be on a flash market sentiment in the morning and bid every morning for dollars with just because IMF is coming or IMF is going. But at the end of the day, also we saw a fleeing of dollars from the accounts, right? I mean, even yesterday, a friend of mine sitting who, like me, has a dollar account because we try to keep our dollar earnings in our dollar accounts in Pakistan and do not want to convert them because they need to pay for education, I need to pay for services abroad, for getting consulting and provide intellectual services, etc., etc. And most of the people made a run, and they've been making a run every week. Let's withdraw them. What if, the same thing Dar does, like NEWSROOM did after the nuclear explosion? And, there is this sentiment. So, couple that with the fact that the banks are playing hokey pokey with us, that's where you're, sort of this trend. But again, this is not your complete answer. I'm being very honest. I mean, we are all still thinking
All right,
about
Amir, we'll
what the
discuss
hell.
that after the show. I'd like to also quote again R Raza when he says that he's confident that by 30th of June we will take the state bank's reserves to 10 billion US dollars and the national reserves near 16 billion US dollars. This, of course, is good news, of course, in the wake of the positivity that we've also heard as a reaction to the agreement with the IMF, and that would be coming in the next few days. What more, in your point of view, putting aside all the facts and figures that Ishaq Dar Saab said, does Pakistan need to do in order to strengthen itself economically? You've talked about the small and medium enterprises, and I think that's a very important and valid point that we need to put more attention towards that. What are the other pointers that you would like to add in order for Pakistan to gain stability economically?
I think there are two factors, and we're not going to go the standard route. I mean, right now, I think the present government even realizes is really we need to go on an economy drive. And this economy drive is not to tell me or my son or my neighbor that you cut how much you're spending. No, the government has to stop spending on itself. So the basic expenses and size of the government and of its 300 plus state-owned enterprises need to be curtailed. You have no idea that, excuse me, protocol alone at the federal level drags 80 billion to 100 billion rupees out of our kitty. Now try and understand that you just raised taxes from, and there's a direct relation, so please understand this, I'm sure you do, that you raise taxes 154 billion, and basically then you continue spending 100 billion on your fuel and moving around with guards and everything. Now, what does that really mean? That really means
but hasn't the
that
government curtailed its
my-
expenses? If I remember well, there was a certain meeting recently in which it was announced openly that the salaries will not be taken and all the benefits that were being taken are also going to be curtailed. Isn't that an important step in the right direction?
Yeah. So basically, that's where I was heading to, is exactly that meeting, which is basically the austerity committee. The austerity committee has done and put forward measures, but no work is being done. So the basic advice is government, let's do that. Number two, release and lower tariffs, and please stop meddling with goods stuck at the port. Goods stuck at the port does not really mean excessive or luxurious consumption. It basically means that we need those goods to produce final goods that have to be exported. So that's step number two. Stop meddling with the border tariffs, stop meddling with holding abroad. I mean, there is no reason to pay for Hajj trips, right, through Pakistani dollars and have your imports exports stuck at the door and let your economy go on a downslide and your real dollar supply, which is your exports, is not there. And last but not least, is time has come to really head. I'm not going to use the word privatization, but shut the state-owned enterprises, be it an airline, be it a ghee mill, or be it a Gudu power plant. Just send everybody home, keep giving them their pays, but shut those businesses, because without that, our expenses and the basic structure of the economy is not going to be remedied.
All right. Thank you so very much, Amir Durrani. Your points are well taken, and of course, as we always say in our show, we try to take as much of points of views as possible. Thank you so very much to have joined us, to have talked to us on the state of economy of Pakistan and what, in your point of view, needs to be done in order to better that state in the wake, of course, of the press meet that R Raza had today, in which he highlighted why and how Pakistan came to this current state of affairs as far as its economy is concerned, and what measures the government is taking in order to bring Pakistan out of that quagmire. Let's come to our last two stories, and the first concerns a two-day global conference to save world's oceans that is underway in Panama. This conference includes business leaders, political leaders, environmental activists and academics that are discussing all kinds of measures and ways and means to address a multitude of threats that face our oceans, and there are plenty. The EU has also pledged more than $860 million for research, monitoring and conservation in the current years. As you very well know, the oceans are home to 80% life of this planet, and if we need to conserve that life, we need to put the necessary attention to the future of the oceans, and that is what is happening in Panama. And finally, Pakistani climate activist and defender Aisha Siddiqa has been named amongst the Women of the Year 2023 as per the American magazine Time. It also includes women from other countries such as Mexico, Iran, Brazil, Ukraine, but of course it highlights those women who've done exceptional work in the fields of arts, politics, human rights. Now, let's talk a little bit about Aisha Siddiqa. She became a climate and human rights defender after being a personal victim of climate change. She realized when she was 14 that environment around her was not safe. She has worked a lot around water pollution and how that needs to be corrected. She has also addressed the 27th session of the Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and she is also a climate sustainability worker. She started her activism at the age of 16, and for 24 years she has been highlighting the impact of climate change problems that are occurring all across the world, with special emphasis on low-income countries such as Pakistan. She's also co-founded an international climate youth coalition named Polluters Out, and has started a climate training course under the name Fossil Free University. Congratulations to Aisha Siddiqa to have been named amongst these prestigious women from all across the world, and of course we hope to see more of her and more of her work coming in the next few months. Of course, that gives a lot of impedance not only to the work that she's doing, but also highlights how young women can come out and work for the benefit of the country, whether it be in the field of climate change, economy, and so much more. We have the resilience, we have all the necessary knowledge. We just have to put it into work in the necessary manner, and that is what Aisha Siddiqa has done. Kudos to her. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah on Monday with new stories and segments that pertain to us here in Pakistan. Have a great weekend. Allah Hafiz.